The train whistle's wail echoed through the vast Arizona desert as Tessa James clutched her worn leather satchel against her chest, her eyes frantically scanning the distant horizon where the railroad tracks disappeared into the gathering dusk. Pyramid City's small wooden platform offered little protection from the biting October wind of 1885, but Tessa had nowhere else to go. Her entire future depended on boarding that eastbound train, a train that should have arrived hours ago. "Miss, you've been standing there since noon," called the station master, an elderly man with kind eyes who was preparing to lock up for the night. "Word just came through on the telegraph. The locomotive broke an axle near Tucson. Won't be arriving till tomorrow afternoon at the earliest." Tessa's heart sank. "But I can't," she stopped herself. There was no use explaining her desperate situation to a stranger. "Thank you for letting me know." The station master hesitated at the door. "I'd offer you a place to stay, but the wife's sister is visiting and we're already cramped." "The hotel in town is—" "I'm aware of the hotel situation," Tessa interrupted, more sharply than she'd intended. The Pyramid City Hotel was owned by the very man she was fleeing. "I'll manage." With a concerned nod, the station master left, the clicking of the lock on the station door echoing with disturbing finality. Alone on the platform, Tessa wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. At 23, she had already endured more than her fair share of hardship. Orphaned at 16, she'd worked as a seamstress for years before accepting a position as a schoolteacher in Pyramid City 8 months ago. It had seemed like Providence until Henry Blackstone, the town's most influential businessman, had decided she would make him a suitable bride, whether she consented or not. The memory of his hand clamped over her mouth, his whispered threats in the darkness of the schoolhouse made her shudder. No one in town would believe her word against his. Her only option was to flee, to catch the train to her cousin's home in St. Louis, where she might start anew. But now, with no train until tomorrow and nowhere safe to spend the night, panic began to rise in her chest. Blackstone would discover her missing by morning. He would search for her, and the train station would be the first place he'd look. The sudden sound of hoofbeats made her heart race. Had he found her already? She pressed herself against the station wall, ready to run, when a single rider emerged from the darkening landscape. The man who approached was not Henry Blackstone, but a stranger tall and broad-shouldered atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat, but she could see he wore the practical garb of a working cowboy, not the fine suits Blackstone favored. The rider slowed his horse as he spotted her, tipping back his hat to reveal a weather-beaten face with startlingly blue eyes. He couldn't have been more than 30, with a neatly trimmed beard and an expression of genuine concern. "Evening, madam," he called, his voice deep but gentle. "Everything all right? Not often someone waits at this station after dark." Tessa hesitated. Every instinct told her to be wary of strangers, especially men, but there was something in his direct gaze that seemed trustworthy. "The train broke down," she replied simply. "I'm waiting for tomorrow's arrival." The man dismounted, keeping a respectful distance. "Planning to wait all night, then?" "I don't have much choice." She lifted her chin, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "Name's Matthew Yates," he said, removing his hat completely. "I run the Double Y Ranch about 5 miles north of here. Not safe for a lady to be alone at this hour." He glanced at the locked station, then back at her face, his expression growing more concerned. "Are you in some kind of trouble, miss?" "James, Tessa James." She saw no point in lying about her name. Blackstone would describe her accurately enough to anyone who asked. "And yes, Mr. Yates, I suppose I am in trouble, though I've done nothing wrong." Matthew Yates studied her for a moment. "I believe you," he said simply, and those 3 words nearly broke her composure. How long had it been since anyone had taken her at her word? "There's a storm brewing," he continued, nodding toward the distant mountains where dark clouds were gathering. "You shouldn't stay here. My ranch is nearby. Got a housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, who'd be glad for female company. You'd be safe there until the train comes tomorrow." Tessa clutched her bag tighter. "Why would you help a stranger?" A small smile touched his lips. "My mother raised me better than to leave a lady stranded in the desert at nightfall." His expression grew serious. "Whatever you're running from, Miss James, you're safe where you are with me, I mean. I give you my word." Something in his steady gaze made Tessa believe him, though logic told her to be cautious. But with the wind picking up and the first drops of rain beginning to fall, her options were dwindling rapidly. "I accept your offer, Mr. Yates," she said finally. "But I must be back here for tomorrow's train. My future depends on it." Matthew nodded, approaching with his horse. "Let me help you up, then. Ranger here is gentle as they come." As his strong hands lifted her effortlessly onto the saddle, Tessa caught the scent of leather and pine. He mounted behind her, careful to maintain a proper distance despite the shared saddle. "Hold tight," he advised, reaching around her to take the reins. "It's not far, but the terrain gets rough in places." As they rode away from the station, the rain began to fall in earnest. Tessa couldn't help glancing back, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake or found an unexpected savior in this quiet cowboy. The Double Y Ranch materialized from the rainy darkness like a mirage, a sprawling main house built of solid timber, several outbuildings, and a large barn. Lanterns glowed in the windows, creating golden squares of light against the stormy night. As they approached, a dog began barking, soon joined by several others. "Home sweet home," Matthew said, guiding his horse to the covered porch. "Not as fancy as some, but it's solid and warm." Before they could dismount, the front door swung open, revealing a plump woman in her 50s, her gray hair tucked into a neat bun. She squinted into the rain. "Matthew Yates, what in tarnation are you doing out in this weather? And who's that with oh?" She stopped short as she noticed Tessa. "Mrs. Finch, this is Miss Tessa James," Matthew explained, helping Tessa down from the horse. "She was stranded at the station, train broke down. Needs shelter till tomorrow. Miss James, this is Mrs. Edith Finch, my housekeeper and the closest thing to a mother I've had since I was 12. Mrs. Finch's expression softened immediately. "You poor dear, you're soaked through. Come in, come in. Matthew, see to that horse and then get yourself dry before you catch your death." The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable, simple, but well-maintained, with polished wooden floors, sturdy furniture, and a large stone fireplace where a welcoming fire crackled. The walls were adorned with a few landscape paintings, and bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that suggested Matthew Yates was more than just a simple rancher. "Let me take your wet things," Mrs. Finch fussed, helping Tessa remove her damp shawl and coat. "You're shivering, poor child. Come closer to the fire while I fetch you some hot tea." Tessa sank gratefully into a chair near the hearth, the warmth beginning to chase away the chill that had settled deep in her bones. As Mrs. Finch bustled away to the kitchen, Tessa took the opportunity to examine her surroundings more closely. The house spoke of masculine practicality combined with touches of refinement: a chest set on a side table, well-worn books of poetry and history, a fine telescope positioned near a window. Mrs. Finch returned with a steaming cup of tea and a plate of biscuits. "Drink this, dear. It'll warm you from the inside. Are you hungry? I can easily prepare something more substantial." "This is perfect, thank you," Tessa replied, accepting the tea gratefully. "You're very kind to take in a stranger." The older woman smiled, Any friend of Matthew's is welcome here." "Oh, we're not friends," Tessa corrected quickly. "Mr. Yates just happened upon me at the station. We'd never met before tonight." Mrs. Finch's eyebrows rose slightly, but her smile didn't falter. "That sounds like our Matthew. Always bringing home strays, though usually they're of the four-legged variety." She sat in the adjacent chair. "May I ask what brings you to these parts, Miss James? We don't get many lone female travelers through Pyramid City." Tessa hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I was the schoolteacher here, but I'm heading east to stay with family." "The schoolteacher? But I thought—" Mrs. Finch stopped herself. "I see. Well, we're pleased to offer you shelter for the night. I'll prepare the guest room. It's small but clean and comfortable." Before Tessa could respond, the door opened, and Matthew entered, having changed into dry clothes. His hair, damp from the rain, curled slightly at his neck, giving him a younger appearance. "Storm's picked up something fierce," he announced, moving to warm his hands by the fire. "Good thing we got you here when we did, Miss James. Roads to town will be washed out by morning at this rate." Tessa nearly choked on her tea. "Washed out, but I have to catch that train tomorrow. It's essential that I—" "Don't fret," Matthew said calmly. "I know these lands better than most. If the train comes, I'll get you there, even if we have to take the high trail through the mesa." His confidence should have reassured her, but Tessa couldn't shake the growing anxiety. If Blackstone discovered her absence and the train's delay, he would search everywhere. How long before he thought to check the surrounding ranches? "Mr. Yates, I appreciate your hospitality, but I should explain my departure is somewhat urgent." She glanced at Mrs. Finch, then back to Matthew. "There are people in town who might come looking for me. I wouldn't want to bring trouble to your door." Matthew studied her face. "This trouble have a name?" Tessa lowered her voice. "Henry Blackstone." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Mrs. Finch made a small noise of distress while Matthew's expression hardened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "I suspected as much," he said grimly. "Blackstone doesn't take kindly to losing what he considers his property, be it land, business, or—" He left the implication hanging. "You know him?" Tessa asked, surprised. "Our paths have crossed," Matthew replied, his tone making it clear those crossings hadn't been pleasant. "He's been trying to buy my water rights for years. Got half the county in his pocket, but not this piece of it." He sat down across from her. "Miss James, if you're running from Blackstone, you should know he's not a man who gives up easily." "I'm well aware," she said quietly. "That's why I need to be on tomorrow's train. He doesn't know I'm leaving, at least, he shouldn't yet. By the time he realizes I'm gone, I'll be halfway to St. Louis." Mrs. Finch reached over to pat Tessa's hand. "You poor dear. What did that monster do to you?" Tessa hesitated, then decided these people deserved honesty if they were risking Blackstone's wrath by sheltering her. "He decided I would make an appropriate wife. When I declined his proposal, he made it clear my consent was optional. He has too much influence in this town for anyone to oppose him." She swallowed hard. "Last night he cornered me in the schoolhouse after hours. If the janitor hadn't arrived when he did, well, I decided it was time to leave." Matthew's knuckles whitened as he gripped the arms of his chair. "Did you report this to Sheriff Miller?" Tessa gave a bitter laugh. "The sheriff plays poker with Blackstone every Thursday and owes him money. Besides, it would be my word against his." A heavy silence fell, broken only by the crackling fire and the intensifying rain lashing against the windows. "Well," Mrs. Finch said finally, standing up with determination, "you're safe here tonight, Miss James. I'll prepare your room and find you something dry to wear." She hurried from the room, but not before Tessa noticed tears in the older woman's eyes. Left alone with Matthew, Tessa felt suddenly self-conscious. "I'm sorry to involve you in my problems, Mr. Yates." Matthew, he corrected gently. And don't apologize. Men like Blackstone thrive because good people stay silent out of fear. He leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. Miss James, Tessa, I promise you'll be on that train tomorrow. But tonight, try to rest. My ranch hands and I keep watch and shifts during storms anyway to check on the cattle. No one will approach without us knowing. His words should have been comforting, but Tessa had learned the hard way that promises were easily made and just as easily broken. Still, something about Matthew Yates inspired trust. Perhaps it was the quiet confidence in his voice or the way he looked directly at her when he spoke, as if her concerns genuinely mattered to him. Thank you, she said simply. And please call me Tessa. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Tessa then, are you hungry, Mrs. Finch always keeps stew simmering during storms. As if on cue, her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since early morning. I suppose I am. I'll fetch you a bowl. Make yourself comfortable, you're safe here. As Matthew left for the kitchen, Tessa turned back to the fire, watching the dancing flames. Safe. Such a simple word, yet it had become so elusive in her life. She couldn't remember the last time she truly felt safe. Yet somehow, in this stranger's home, with rain hammering the roof and danger possibly pursuing her, she felt the tightest knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen, just slightly. Later, after a hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread, Mrs. Finch showed Tessa to a small but comfortable bedroom at the back of the house. She'd provided a flannel nightgown and a robe that were slightly too large but wonderfully warm and dry. These were my daughters, Mrs. Finch explained, laying out the garments on the bed. She's married and living in Denver now. I'm sure she wouldn't mind you borrowing them. You're very kind, Tessa said. I can't thank you enough. Mrs. Finch smiled warmly. No need for thanks. Any decent person would do the same. She hesitated by the door. You know, Mr. Yates is a good man, one of the best I've known. If he says you'll be safe here, you can believe it. After the housekeeper left, Tessa changed into the borrowed nightclothes and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the storm rage outside. The contrast between her situation now and what it might have been huddled in some corner of the train station, cold and terrified, was not lost on her. Providence had sent Matthew Yates her way, and for that she was profoundly grateful. Still, she couldn't relax completely. What if Blackstone discovered her missing tonight? What if he somehow tracked her here? The questions circled in her mind like vultures, preventing sleep despite her exhaustion. A soft knock at her door startled her. Yes, she called cautiously. It's Matthew. May I speak with you a moment? Tessa pulled on the robe, tightening it securely before opening the door. Matthew stood in the hallway, a folded paper in his hand and concern etched across his features. I'm sorry to disturb you, he said, but one of my men just rode in from town. Thought you should know Blackstone's already searching for you. Has men at the station and the stagecoach office. Cold fear washed over her. Already? But how? Apparently he went to the schoolhouse this evening and found it locked with no sign of you. He's telling people you stole money from the school fund, that he's concerned for your mental state. It's a lie, of course, he added quickly. But it gives him reason to organize a search without revealing his true motives. Tessa sank against the doorframe. Then I'm trapped. If he has men watching the station, I'll never get on that train. Not necessarily. Matthew handed her the folded paper. This just came by messenger from the station master. The train won't reach Pyramid City at all. The damage was worse than initially reported, and with the washed-out tracks from tonight's storm, they're rerouting through Clayton Junction, 40 miles north, day after tomorrow. Clayton Junction. Tessa's hopes fell further. How would I even get there? Matthew's expression was steady. I'll take you. My ranch hand Jack knows those northern trails better than anyone. Says they're still passable, storm or no. He paused. It means an extra day here, though. Would you be comfortable with that? The thought of remaining so close to Blackstone for another full day terrified her, but what choice did she have? Do you really believe he won't find me here? This ranch is well off the main roads and my men are loyal. More importantly, Blackstone and I have history bad blood. My place would be the last he'd search. A hint of grim satisfaction crossed his face. He knows better than to trespass on my land. Tessa studied him, wondering about the story behind those words. What happened between you two? Matthew hesitated. It's a long tale and you need rest. He turned to go, then stopped. Tessa, I want you to have this. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small revolver. It's loaded. Do you know how to use it? She stared at the weapon, then slowly extended her hand to take it. My father taught me before he died. Good, keep it close. Not that I expect trouble, but... He met her eyes. Your safety matters to me. Sleep well. Before she could respond, he was gone, his footsteps retreating down the hallway. Tessa closed and locked her door, placing the revolver on the nightstand within easy reach. The weight of it was both frightening and reassuring. She extinguished the lamp and climbed into bed, listening to the rain while thoughts tumbled through her mind. Why would a man she just met care so much about her safety? What history did he share with Blackstone that created such animosity? And most troubling, how had Blackstone discovered her absence so quickly? Despite these unsettling questions, exhaustion eventually claimed her, and Tessa fell into a deep sleep, dreaming of trains that never arrived and a blue-eyed cowboy who promised safety in a world that offered none. Morning brought watery sunshine filtering through the clouds and the rich aroma of coffee and bacon wafting through the house. Tessa dressed quickly in her now dry clothes from yesterday, tucked the revolver into her pocket, and ventured toward the kitchen. She found Mrs. Finch bustling about, preparing a hearty breakfast while Matthew sat at the large wooden table, studying a map spread before him. He looked up when she entered, his face brightening. Good morning. Hope you slept well despite the storm. Better than I expected, Tessa admitted, accepting the cup of coffee Mrs. Finch offered. Though I'm anxious about the change in plans. Matthew nodded, gesturing for her to join him at the table. We're mapping the route to Clayton Junction now. Normally it's a full day's ride, but with the recent rains. He traced a line on the map. We'll need to leave at first light tomorrow to ensure we reach the station before the train arrives. Tessa questioned. Surely you don't need to make the journey yourself. I wouldn't want to take you from your responsibilities here. A slight smile touched Matthew's lips. I promised to see you safely onto that train, and I mean to keep that promise. Besides, he added, his expression growing serious, Blackstone has men watching the roads. If we encounter them, you'll want me along. Something in his tone raised questions, but before Tessa could ask, Mrs. Finch placed a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits before her. Eat up, dear. You'll need your strength. As they ate breakfast, Matthew outlined his plan. They would spend today preparing, while maintaining the appearance of normal ranch activities to avoid suspicion. Tomorrow, they would depart before dawn, taking a seldom-used trail through the foothills that would keep them hidden from the main roads where Blackstone's men might be watching. What about your ranch? Tessa asked, concerned. Surely you can't leave it unattended. My foreman, Tom, has been with me for 7 years. He can manage things for a few days. Matthew sipped his coffee. Besides, helping you reach that train safely is more important right now. The matter-of-fact way he said this, as if her safety was naturally his priority, touched Tessa deeply. She'd grown so accustomed to fending for herself that his straightforward willingness to help felt almost foreign. I don't know how to thank you, she said quietly, Matthew met her eyes. No thanks needed. Any decent man would do the same. Mrs. Finch made a small sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Decent men are rarer than gold nuggets in these parts, Miss James. You happen to find one of the few. A knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. Matthew rose immediately, his hand moving instinctively to the pistol at his hip. "Stay here," he instructed, his voice low. Mrs. Finch moved to stand protectively near Tessa as Matthew left the kitchen. Tessa's heart raced as she heard muffled voices from the front of the house. Had Blackstone found her already? Her hand closed around the revolver in her pocket. Minutes later, Matthew returned, relief evident on his face. "Just my neighbor, old Jim Cutter. His fence lines down again after the storm. Nothing to worry about." He noticed Tessa's hand in her pocket and added gently, "You're still safe here." The day passed slowly, with Tessa helping Mrs. Finch with household tasks to keep her mind occupied. Matthew disappeared for several hours to tend to ranch business, leaving instructions with his men to alert him immediately if any strangers approached. By mid-afternoon, cabin fever had set in, and Tessa ventured onto the covered back porch for fresh air. The storm had left the landscape washed clean, with distant mountains sharp against the blue sky. The ranch spread out before her corrals, barns, and beyond them, vast pastures where cattle grazed. It was peaceful in a way Pyramid City had never been. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to a rider approaching from the fields. Matthew, returning from his rounds. He rode with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. As he neared the house, he spotted her on the porch and changed direction, guiding his horse to the hitching post nearby. "Enjoying the view," he called as he dismounted. "It's beautiful," she admitted. "So different from what I'm used to." Matthew removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "Where are you from originally?" "Illinois. A small town outside Chicago." Tessa leaned against the porch railing. "My parents died when I was 16. Influenza. I worked as a seamstress until I saved enough to attend normal school." "How did you end up in Pyramid City?" "It's not exactly a destination of choice for most." Tessa smiled wryly. "The advertisement said they needed a teacher urgently, and the pay was better than most places were offering. I didn't ask enough questions about why the position was vacant." "The previous teacher left suddenly after receiving unwanted attention from a prominent citizen," Matthew said grimly. "I'm guessing you weren't told that part." "No. By the time I understood Blackstone's interest, I had already signed a year's contract and spent most of my savings getting here." She sighed. "I thought I could manage the situation, keep my distance, be professional. I was wrong." Matthew joined her at the railing, keeping a respectful distance. "It's not your fault, Tessa. Men like Blackstone see what they want and take it. Consequences be damned." A shadow crossed his face. "I learned that lesson the hard way." She studied him, curiosity winning out over discretion. "What happened between you two? You mentioned bad blood." For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he gazed out at the distant mountains and began to speak. 5 years ago, my younger sister, Claire, worked as a hostess at Blackstone's hotel. She was 20, beautiful, ambitious, wanted to save money to open her own millinery shop. His voice remained steady, but Tessa noticed his knuckles whitening as he gripped the railing. Blackstone took an interest in her, showered her with gifts, promises. When she rejected him, he became insistent. One night, she didn't come home from work. Tessa's heart sank, already anticipating the story's dark turn. "I found her 2 days later at an abandoned line shack 10 miles from town. She'd been." He closed his eyes briefly. "She was alive but broken, wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat. Doctor said she'd been drugged, assaulted. Claire never named her attacker, but I knew, everyone knew." "What did you do?" Tessa asked softly. A muscle twitched in Matthew's jaw. What any brother would do, I confronted him. It got physical. I would have killed him if Sheriff Miller hadn't intervened. But surely with your sister's testimony, Claire was too traumatized to testify. And without her statement, it was my word against his, a struggling rancher against the town's most powerful businessman. Bitterness crept into his voice. Blackstone pressed charges against me for assault. I spent 3 months in jail. By the time I got out, Claire had. He swallowed hard. She took her own life, left a note saying she couldn't live with the shame, the memories. Tessa's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, Matthew. After that, I focused on building this ranch, making it successful. Partly to honor Claire's memory, partly to have something Blackstone couldn't touch. He turned to face her directly. So when I tell you I understand what you're running from, I mean it. And when I promise to get you safely away from here, that's a vow I'd die before breaking. The raw emotion in his voice left no doubt of his sincerity. Impulsively, Tessa reached out, placing her hand over his on the railing. Thank you for telling me, and for risking so much to help me. Matthew looked down at their hands, then back to her face. Something passed between them in that moment, a connection deeper than mere sympathy or gratitude. For a heartbeat, Tessa thought he might turn his hand to clasp hers, but instead he straightened, gently withdrawing. I should check on the preparations for tomorrow, he said, his voice rougher than before. Jack's gathered supplies and chosen the horses. We'll leave before dawn. As he walked away, Tessa remained on the porch, watching his retreating figure. The story he'd shared explained so much: his immediate willingness to help her, his hatred for Blackstone, the shadows she sometimes glimpsed behind his eyes. It also stirred something unexpected within her, a deep admiration for his resilience, and perhaps something more that she wasn't ready to examine closely. That evening, dinner was a subdued affair. Mrs. Finch had prepared a hearty meal of roast chicken and vegetables, but conversation was minimal, everyone preoccupied with thoughts of the journey ahead. Matthew reviewed the route with Jack, a weather-beaten ranch hand in his 40s with a reputation as the best tracker in the territory. Tessa listened carefully, committing the plan to memory. After dinner, as Mrs. Finch cleared away the dishes, Matthew approached Tessa with a bundle of clothing. These were Claire's, he said quietly, riding clothes. They should fit you better than what you're wearing for a long journey on horseback. Tessa accepted the bundle, touched by the gesture and its significance. Are you sure? I don't want to disturb memories. Claire would have wanted them used to help someone in your situation, he assured her. Besides, a dress will draw attention on the trails. These will help you blend in. Later, in the privacy of her room, Tessa carefully laid out the clothes: practical brown trousers, a blue flannel shirt, a leather vest, and sturdy boots. The thought of wearing a dead woman's clothing was unsettling, but Matthew was right. They would be more practical for riding and less conspicuous if they encountered others. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Tessa, it's Matthew. May I have a word? She opened the door to find him holding a folded piece of paper. What is it? She asked. A letter just arrived from Clayton Junction by special messenger. The train schedule's been changed again. It's coming through earlier than expected. We'll need to leave tonight within the hour. Alarm shot through her. Tonight? But the darkness, the trails, the moon is nearly full, and Jack knows these paths blindfolded. If we wait until morning, we risk missing the train. He handed her the paper. I'm sorry for the sudden change, but we don't have a choice. Tessa unfolded the paper, scanning the telegraph message that confirmed the new train schedule. I understand. I'll change and be ready in 20 minutes. Matthew nodded. Pack light. 1 small bag only. We'll need to move fast. As soon as he left, Tessa changed into Claire's clothing. The fit wasn't perfect. The previous owner had been slightly taller, but they were comfortable and practical. She quickly packed her few belongings, including the revolver Matthew had given her. Before leaving the room, she paused at the small desk and hastily penned a note of thanks to Mrs. Finch. Whatever happened on the journey ahead, she wanted the kind housekeeper to know how much her compassion had meant. The ranch was a flurry of quiet activity when Tessa emerged. Matthew and Jack were loading supplies onto 3 horses in the front yard, while Mrs. Finch prepared a bundle of food for the journey. The night was clear, with a bright moon illuminating the landscape in silvery light. "You look ready for the trail," Matthew commented, approval in his voice as he took in her attire. "Ever ridden astride before?" "Not since I was a girl," Tessa admitted, "but I'm a quick learner." "That's good." He gestured to a dappled gray mare. "This is Pepper. She's steady and sure-footed, perfect for a less experienced rider." While Jack secured the last of their supplies, Matthew gave Tessa a brief refresher on handling the horse. His instructions were clear and patient, his hand occasionally guiding hers on the reins. Each touch, though professional in nature, sent a curious warmth through her that had nothing to do with the mild night air. Mrs. Finch emerged from the house, her eyes bright with unshed tears as she handed Matthew the food bundle. "You be careful, all of you. Those northern trails aren't forgiving, even in good weather." "We'll be fine, Mrs. Finch," Matthew assured her. "Keep things running here and tell Tom I'll be back in 3 days at most." The older woman turned to embrace Tessa. "Godspeed, my dear. I hope you find safety and happiness wherever you're bound." "Thank you for everything," Tessa whispered, returning the hug fiercely. In just one day, this woman had shown her more motherly care than she'd experienced in years. With final preparations complete, Matthew helped Tessa mount Pepper, then swung effortlessly onto his own horse. Jack, already mounted, moved to take the lead position. "Stay close and follow my signals," Matthew instructed Tessa. "If there's trouble, do exactly as I say without hesitation." "Understood," she nodded, gripping the reins tightly as nervousness and determination warred within her. "Then let's ride." They set out at a measured pace, 3 riders slipping away from the ranch like shadows under the moonlight. Jack led them north, avoiding the main trails and cutting across open country where the ground was firm enough for the horses. Tessa concentrated on maintaining her seat and following Matthew's occasional hand signals, finding her riding skills returning more quickly than she'd expected. For the first hour, they rode in silence, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the occasional call of a night bird. Then, Jack raised a hand, signaling a halt. He pointed toward a distant ridge where the moonlight revealed a pair of riders moving parallel to their route. "Blackstone's men," Matthew murmured, moving his horse closer to Jack's. The tracker nodded. "Recognize the horses. That's Wade Turner and Bill Gentry. They work for Blackstone." Matthew turned to Tessa. "They haven't spotted us yet. We'll cut east through the arroyos, then double back north once we're clear." The detour added nearly an hour to their journey, but they successfully avoided the searching riders. By midnight, they had reached the foothills that marked the beginning of the more challenging terrain. The moon cast long shadows across the landscape, creating an otherworldly tableau of silvery light and inky darkness. "We'll rest the horses for 10 minutes, Matthew announced, dismounting and helping Tessa from her saddle. "There's a stream just ahead where they can drink." While Jack tended the animals, Matthew led Tessa to a fallen log where they could sit. He offered her his canteen, which she accepted gratefully. "You're riding well," he observed. "Not many city women would handle this journey so capably." "I'm motivated," she replied with a small smile. "And I had a good teacher," he chuckled softly. We've got another 6 hours of riding ahead. The hardest stretch is through Devil's Pass, narrow trail, steep drops, but after that, it's easier going to Clayton Junction. Tessa glanced up at the stars, so brilliantly clear in the desert night. It's strange. Yesterday at this time I was terrified, alone on that platform. Now I'm racing across the wilderness with 2 men I barely know, and somehow I feel safer. Matthew's gaze was steady in the moonlight. You strike me as someone who's faced difficult choices before and come through stronger. Perhaps, she acknowledged, though I've never had quite this much adventure in my life. Adventure sounds better than desperate flight from a dangerous man, he remarked wryly. True enough. She studied his profile, wondering at the circumstances that had brought them together. What will you do after this? When you return to your ranch, he shrugged. Same as always. Tend the cattle, mend fences, try to make the land produce enough to keep going another year. He paused. What about you? What awaits in St. Louis? My cousin runs a boarding house. She's offered me a place to stay while I look for another teaching position. Tessa sighed. Starting over, I suppose. Sometimes starting over is the bravest thing a person can do. Before she could respond, Jack approached. Horses are watered and rested. We should move on if we want to clear the pass before dawn. The next leg of their journey proved more challenging as the terrain became increasingly rugged. The trail narrowed, winding along cliffside paths where a misstep would mean disaster. Tessa focused intently on following Matthew's lead, trusting Pepper's sure footing and trying not to look down at the dark chasms that occasionally yawned beside them. As they navigated a particularly treacherous stretch, a loose stone clattered beneath Pepper's hoof, causing the mare to sidestep nervously. Tessa gasped, momentarily losing her balance, but Matthew was instantly beside her, his hand steadying her arm. Easy, he murmured, to both horse and rider. You're doing fine. Keep your eyes on the trail ahead, not on the drop. His calm presence restored her confidence, and they continued without further incident. By the time they emerged from the pass, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn. Jack consulted his pocket watch. Making good time. Another 3 hours to Clayton Junction if we keep this pace. They pressed on as the landscape gradually changed, the stark desert giving way to rolling hills dotted with scrub oak and juniper. The rising sun cast long shadows across the land, painting the rocks in hues of gold and amber. Around mid-morning, they crested a hill to see smoke rising in the distance, not the natural haze of dust or morning mist, but the deliberate column of a campfire. Jack raised his hand, signaling another halt. Riders ahead, could be innocent travelers, could be trouble. Matthew reached for the rifle secured to his saddle. Let's find out. Tessa, stay behind me. They approached cautiously, using a stand of trees for cover. As they drew closer, Tessa could make out 3 men gathered around a small fire. Her blood ran cold when she recognized one of them, Samuel Reed, Blackstone's personal assistant and most loyal enforcer. Blackstone's men, she whispered, shrinking back. How did they get ahead of us? Matthew's expression was grim. They must have guessed we'd head for Clayton Junction when the train schedule changed. They're blocking the main trail into town. Is there another way? Tessa asked desperately. Jack nodded slowly. There's an old mining road that cuts through the eastern ridge. Rough going, and it adds at least 2 hours to the journey. 2 hours we don't have, Matthew said, checking his watch. The train arrives in 4 hours. We need a different plan. After a brief consultation, they decided on a bold strategy. Jack would create a diversion to the west, drawing the men away from the trail. Meanwhile, Matthew and Tessa would make a dash for Clayton Junction once the path was clear. Be careful, Jack, Matthew warned as the older man prepared to depart. Don't take unnecessary risks." Jack grinned, patting the pistol at his hip. "Been outfoxing troublemakers since before you were born, boss. I'll lead them on a merry chase and meet you back at the ranch." As Jack rode off, Matthew and Tessa retreated to a hidden position where they could observe the camp. Within 20 minutes, they heard a series of gunshots from the western hills, followed by Jack's voice calling out taunts that carried clearly in the morning air. The three men at the camp instantly mounted up, racing toward the source of the disturbance. As soon as they disappeared from view, Matthew signaled to Tessa, "Now's our chance. Stay close and ride hard." They spurred their horses forward, abandoning caution for speed as they galloped down the trail toward Clayton Junction. The terrain was more open here, offering little cover if Blackstone's men returned unexpectedly. Tessa bent low over Pepper's neck, the wind whipping her hair as they raced across the landscape. For nearly an hour they rode at breakneck pace, pushing the horses as much as they dared. Finally, as they approached a river crossing, Matthew signaled to slow. "We need to let the horses breathe," he explained as they dismounted. "They're strong, but we've been pushing them hard." While the horses drank from the river, Tessa attempted to tidy her wind-tangled hair. "How much farther to Clayton Junction?" "About an hour at a steady pace. We should arrive with time to spare before the train." Matthew filled their canteens, then turned to face her. "Tessa, once we reach town, things might get complicated. Blackstone could have men waiting there too." "What do we do if they're watching the station?" Matthew's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "I have an idea, but you may not like it." He hesitated. "We could make it appear that you're my wife, a couple drawing less attention than a single woman traveling alone." The suggestion caught Tessa by surprise. "Your wife, just for appearance's sake," he added quickly. "We need to act the part convincingly enough to get you safely onto that train." Tessa considered the plan. It made tactical sense, though the thought of pretending such intimacy with Matthew sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. "Very well, if you think it will help." They resumed their journey at a more sustainable pace, the horses recovering their strength as they covered the final miles to Clayton Junction. As they rode, Matthew outlined his plan in more detail. They would approach the town openly, presenting themselves as a married couple traveling to visit family in the East. Matthew would secure her train ticket while she remained with the horses, minimizing her exposure in public. "What about you?" Tessa asked. "Once I'm on the train, Blackstone will know you helped me escape. He'll be furious." A grim smile touched Matthew's lips. "Blackstone and I have unfinished business anyway. This just adds another chapter." "I don't want you to suffer because of me," she insisted. "Some things are worth suffering for," he replied simply, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. The moment was broken as they crested a final hill to see Clayton Junction spread before them, a dusty collection of buildings centered around the railroad station. Smoke rose from the locomotive already waiting at the platform. "We made it," Tessa breathed, relief washing over her. Matthew's expression remained vigilant as he surveyed the town. "Don't celebrate yet. We still need to get you on that train." They approached Clayton Junction cautiously, adopting their roles as husband and wife with subtle changes in posture and proximity. Matthew rode slightly ahead, but remained close enough that they could converse naturally. When they reached the outskirts of town, he reached across to take her hand briefly, a surprisingly convincing gesture of marital affection. "Ready, Mrs. Yates?" he asked with a wink. Despite the tension of the moment, Tessa found herself smiling. "Ready, Mr. Yates." The town was busier than expected, with travelers and locals crowding the main street. As they neared the station, Matthew tensed, his eyes narrowing on a figure leaning against a hitching post. "Wade Turner," he murmured. "One of Blackstone's men. He's watching the station." Tessa's heart sank. "He'll recognize me." "Not necessarily. You're dressed differently, and he's looking for a woman traveling alone." Matthew considered for a moment. "Change of plan. We'll stable the horses at the livery first. Give me time to assess the situation at the station." They diverted to the livery stable at the edge of town, where Matthew arranged care for their mounts. As the stableman led the horses away, he turned to Tessa, his expression serious. "I counted 3 of Blackstone's men near the station. They're being subtle, but they're definitely watching for someone." "The train leaves in less than an hour," Tessa said, anxiety rising in her voice. "What do we do?" Matthew reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, a surprisingly intimate gesture that seemed designed for any watching eyes, but sent warmth spreading through her nonetheless. "Trust me," he said softly. "I have one more idea." He led her to a small cafe across from the station, where they took a table by the window with a clear view of the platform. A few quick words with the waitress resulted in 2 cups of coffee being placed before them. "See the freight car being loaded at the far end of the train." Matthew nodded subtly toward the activity. "That's our answer. The clerk at the livery owes me a favor. He's going to create a distraction in about 10 minutes, something to draw attention away from the station briefly. When that happens, we'll move quickly to the freight car. The porter there is an honest man who can be persuaded to look the other way while you board." "And then?" Tessa asked. "Once the train is underway, you can move to the passenger cars. By then, it will be too late for anyone to remove you from the train." He sipped his coffee calmly, though his eyes remained alert. "The important thing is to act naturally until then. We're just a married couple having coffee before a journey." Tessa nodded, wrapping her hands around her cup to hide their trembling. "I never thought escape would be so complicated." Matthew's expression softened. "Freedom often comes at a price." "Matthew," she began, suddenly needing to express the gratitude overwhelming her. "I don't know how I'll ever repay." A commotion from down the street interrupted her words. Shouts and the sound of horses whinnying in panic drew everyone's attention. A wagon had apparently broken free of its team and was rolling wildly down the main street. "That's our distraction," Matthew said urgently. "Let's go. Stay close and follow my lead." They exited the cafe quickly, using the confusion to move unnoticed toward the far end of the train. As predicted, Blackstone's men had abandoned their posts to assist with the runaway wagon, leaving the platform momentarily unguarded. Matthew approached the porter supervising the loading of the freight car, speaking in low tones while pressing something into the man's hand. After a brief hesitation, the porter nodded and turned away, suddenly very interested in a manifest on his clipboard. "Quickly," Matthew urged, helping Tessa into the partially loaded car. "Find a place to hide among the crates. Once we're clear of the station, move to the passenger cars." Tessa climbed aboard, then turned back to him, suddenly reluctant to leave. "Matthew," he reached up, his hand warm against her cheek. "Go, Tessa. Your future is waiting." The whistle blew, signaling the train's imminent departure. With one last look at the man who had risked so much to help her, Tessa retreated into the shadows of the freight car. Through a gap in the sliding door, she watched as Matthew stepped back from the train, his tall figure growing smaller as the locomotive began to move. The expression on his face, a mixture of satisfaction and something that looked remarkably like loss, tugged at her heart in unexpected ways. As Clayton Junction receded behind her, Tessa settled among the crates, trying to process the whirlwind of events that had brought her to this moment. She was free from Blackstone, heading toward a new life in St. Louis. She should have felt nothing but relief and gratitude. Yet as miles stretched between her and the dusty town, She found her thoughts returning not to the danger she'd escaped, but to the man who had made that escape possible. Matthew Yates, with his quiet strength and unwavering principles, had shown her a kind of goodness she'd almost stopped believing existed. The realization struck her with unexpected force. In fleeing one future, she might be leaving behind another that she hadn't even considered. As the train rumbled eastward, Tessa made her way carefully through the freight car, finding a position near the door that connected to the passenger carriages. When the train made a brief stop at a water tower an hour later, she slipped through to the passenger section, drawing curious glances but no challenges from the other travelers. Finding an empty seat by a window, she gazed out at the passing landscape. The wild beauty of the territory was undeniable: rugged mountains, vast plains, endless sky. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider what it might be like to build a life here, far from the city constraints she'd always known. Such thoughts inevitably led back to Matthew. In just 2 days, he had shown her more kindness, more respect than she'd experienced in years. The connection between them had been immediate and profound, something beyond mere gratitude or circumstance. By evening, as the train continued its eastward journey, Tessa had made a decision. St. Louis represented safety and familiarity, but also a retreat to the life she'd always known. The Arizona territory offered uncertainty, but also possibility, and perhaps the chance to explore the unexpected feelings that had taken root in her heart. When the conductor announced their approach to the next station, a small settlement where the train would stop overnight before continuing east, Tessa gathered her meager belongings. Her heart raced with a mixture of nervousness and determination as she disembarked. The station was little more than a wooden platform beside a cluster of buildings. A telegraph office stood nearby, its windows still lit despite the late hour. With purposeful steps, Tessa entered the office and requested a form. She carefully composed a message to be sent to Clayton Junction, addressed to Matthew Yates at the Double Y Ranch. The words came easily. Journey interrupted by unexpected clarity. Returning to Pyramid City by westbound train tomorrow. Hope not too late to explore possibilities we left unspoken. Tessa. After paying the fee and ensuring the message would be sent immediately, Tessa secured a room at the small hotel adjacent to the station. As she prepared for bed, doubt briefly assailed her. Was she being impulsive? Romantic notions rarely survived reality's harsh light. Yet the image of Matthew's face as the train pulled away, that mix of satisfaction and loss, convinced her that what she'd felt between them hadn't been one-sided. Some opportunities came only once in a lifetime. This was hers to seize or to let slip away forever. The following morning, Tessa boarded the westbound train with a strange sense of both nervousness and rightness. She had spent her entire adult life being practical, making the safe choice. For once, she was following her heart, however uncertain the outcome. The westward journey seemed to take forever, each mile simultaneously bringing her closer to possibility and to potential disappointment. What if Matthew had already moved on? What if the connection she'd felt had been heightened by danger and circumstance? Late afternoon brought the train to Clayton Junction. Tessa disembarked, scanning the platform anxiously, but seeing no familiar face. Of course, her message might not have reached him yet, or he might be unable to leave the ranch on such short notice. Disappointed but undeterred, she inquired about transportation to Pyramid City, learning that the stagecoach wouldn't depart until morning. She would need to spend the night in Clayton Junction and continue her journey tomorrow. As she turned to locate the hotel, a commotion at the far end of the platform caught her attention. A rider was approaching at a gallop, dust billowing behind him. Even at a distance, She recognized the broad-shouldered figure and the chestnut stallion, Matthew. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, scanning the platform with an intensity that made her heart race. When his eyes found her, the transformation of his expression from anxious searching to radiant joy erased any doubts she might have harbored. Tessa moved toward him as he strode down the platform, meeting in the middle as if drawn by invisible force. For a moment, they simply stood facing each other, both breathless with the reality of reunion. "Your telegram," Matthew began. "I wasn't sure I couldn't leave," she interrupted. "Not without knowing if," she faltered, suddenly unsure how to express the tumult of emotions that had driven her decision. Matthew's eyes never left her face. "If what we felt was real, if there could be something between us worth exploring." She nodded, relief washing through her at his understanding. "Yes, exactly that. I've been asking myself the same question since watching that train pull away." His voice was low, intimate despite their public surroundings. "I've never met anyone like you, Tessa. Your courage, your determination." He shook his head slightly as if words were inadequate. "I know it's fast, perhaps foolish. Sometimes the heart knows in moments what the mind takes years to understand," she said softly. A smile broke across his face. "That sounds like something Mrs. Finch would say. She's a wise woman." Tessa hesitated. "Matthew, I need you to understand I'm not running from something anymore. I'm choosing to stay to see where this might lead. But I need my independence too. I'm still a teacher, still have my own dreams." "I wouldn't want it any other way," he assured her. "The double Y has been missing a schoolhouse. The children of my ranch hands and neighboring farms have to ride 10 miles to the nearest school. Perhaps Pyramid City's loss could be our gain." The thoughtfulness of the suggestion, offering her both purpose and independence, confirmed what Tessa had begun to believe. This man truly saw her, respected her, in ways few others ever had. "I'd like that very much," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her. Matthew reached for her hand, his touch sending warmth cascading through her. "Tessa James, I can't promise an easy life. Ranching is hard work with uncertain rewards, but I can promise honesty, respect, and a partnership of equals. Would you consider building something with me, step by step, day by day?" In his eyes, she saw not possession or control, the hallmarks of Blackstone's interest, but genuine admiration and growing affection. This was a man who would stand beside her, not above her. "I would consider it the greatest adventure," she answered, her free hand rising to touch his face. The kiss that followed was gentle, questioning at first, then deepening with shared certainty. Around them, the world continued its business, travelers hurrying past, the station agent calling departures, but for Tessa and Matthew, time seemed momentarily suspended in the perfection of possibility. When they finally parted, Matthew's smile was tender. "Mrs. Finch will be overjoyed. She's been singing your praises since you left." "Has she now?" Tessa laughed softly. "And what about Blackstone? Won't he cause trouble when he learns I've returned?" Matthew's expression grew serious. "While you were gone, things changed in Pyramid City. The telegraph operator, a good man I've known for years, came forward with evidence that Blackstone has been intercepting private communications, including government dispatches. The territorial marshal arrived yesterday to investigate. Blackstone's influence is crumbling quickly." "Justice does come eventually," Tessa marveled. "Sometimes it needs a little help," Matthew acknowledged. "And speaking of help, Jack returned safely. He's quite proud of the chase he led Blackstone's men on, took them halfway to the New Mexico border before they realized they'd been duped." As the sun began to set, painting the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold, Matthew gathered the reins of his horse. "It's too late to start for the ranch tonight. There's a decent hotel here in Clayton Junction. Tomorrow we can begin the journey home if you're ready." Home. The word resonated within Tessa with unexpected rightness. Not a place she was fleeing to, but one she was choosing with clear eyes and an open heart. "I'm ready," she said, slipping her hand into his. 3 months later, Tessa stood in the doorway of the newly constructed schoolhouse on Double Y Ranch land, watching as her students filed out at the end of the day. The one-room building was simple but well-made, with large windows that flooded the space with natural light and views of the mountains beyond. 15 children from the ranch and neighboring properties now attended daily, ranging in age from 6 to 16. Teaching multiple grade levels simultaneously was challenging, but Tessa had discovered a deep satisfaction in bringing education to this remote community. As the last child departed, calling farewells over their shoulder, Tessa began the familiar routine of straightening desks and preparing for tomorrow's lessons. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her to the doorway once more. Matthew dismounted, his face breaking into a smile that still made her heart skip. After 3 months of courtship, his effect on her hadn't diminished in the slightest. "How was your day, Miss James?" he asked, climbing the steps to join her on the small porch. "Productive." Young Tommy finally mastered his multiplication tables, and Sarah's reading has improved tremendously. She accepted his brief kiss with a contented sigh. "And yours, Mr. Yates? The new irrigation system is working better than expected. We should be able to expand the vegetable gardens next spring." He glanced at the schoolhouse with evident pride. Hard to believe this was just a dream a few months ago. "Many things were just dreams a few months ago," she reminded him, linking her arm through his as they walked toward the main house. Their courtship had progressed with deliberate care, neither rushing nor denying the deepening connection between them. Weekly dinners with Mrs. Finch, who had assumed the role of unofficial chaperone with gleeful dedication. Rides across the ranch property, where Matthew shared his vision for the land, and Tessa contributed ideas for its development. Evenings spent reading together by the fire, discovering shared interests in literature and philosophy. Through it all, Matthew had been patient, respectful of her need for independence even as their feelings for each other grew stronger. When he'd proposed the building of the schoolhouse, it had been not just a practical solution for the community, but a demonstration of his commitment to supporting her vocation. As they approached the main house, Tessa noticed unusual activity: ranch hands moving extra chairs onto the porch, Mrs. Finch directing the placement of lanterns along the walkway. "What's all this?" she asked, puzzled. Matthew's expression was suspiciously innocent. "Just some preparations for dinner." "Quite elaborate preparations for an ordinary Tuesday," she observed, raising an eyebrow. "Perhaps it's not so ordinary after all." He guided her to a bench beneath the large oak tree that shaded the front yard. "Tessa, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart began to race as Matthew took both her hands in his. "These past months have been the happiest of my life," he said softly. "Watching you build the school, seeing you bring knowledge and joy to those children, sharing my home and my dreams with you, I can no longer imagine my life without you in it." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. "I know we agreed to take things slowly to be certain. I believe I am certain, more certain than I've ever been about anything. But if you need more time, I'll wait as long as necessary." Opening the box revealed a delicate ring with a single perfect sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "This was my grandmother's," Matthew explained. "Like you, she was a teacher who valued education and independence above all else. It's beautiful, Tessa whispered, emotion tightening her throat. Tessa James, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Not to change who you are or what you do, but to build a shared life where we both can grow and thrive together. Tears of joy blurred her vision as she nodded. Yes, Matthew. Yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, cheers erupted from the porch of the main house, where Mrs. Finch and the ranch hands had gathered to witness the moment. Matthew laughed, pulling Tessa to her feet and into his arms. I hope you don't mind the audience, he murmured against her hair. They've been almost as invested in our courtship as we have. They're family now, she replied, surprising herself with how naturally the word came. Of course they should be here. The celebration that followed was joyous and unpretentious, a hearty meal prepared by Mrs. Finch, music from Jack's harmonica and Tom's fiddle, dancing under the stars as lanterns glowed like earthbound constellations around them. As evening deepened into night, Tessa and Matthew found a quiet moment alone on the porch steps, watching the celebration continue in the yard. Happy? Matthew asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. Tessa looked up at the vast canopy of stars, then at the ring gleaming on her finger, and finally at the face of the man who had rescued her from a train platform, and in doing so, had changed the course of her life. More than I ever thought possible, she answered truthfully. When I waited for that train that never came, I thought my life was falling apart. I couldn't see that it was actually falling into place. Matthew's smile was tender as he traced the curve of her cheek with his fingertips. Sometimes the best journeys are the ones we never planned to take. And the best destinations are the ones we never knew we were seeking, she added, leaning into his embrace. Above them, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the night sky, a fitting metaphor, Tessa thought, for the unexpected trajectory that had brought her to this moment, this place, this man. What had begun as desperate flight had transformed into the most profound homecoming of her life. That night, as the celebration wound down and guests departed, Tessa stood once more on the porch of what would soon be officially her home. The ring on her finger caught the moonlight, sending prisms of light dancing across the weathered boards. 6 months ago, she had been a solitary figure on a train platform, clutching a bag containing her few possessions and desperate hopes for escape. Now she stood surrounded by people who had become family, with roots beginning to sink deep into this wild, beautiful land. Penny for your thoughts? Matthew asked, joining her at the porch railing. Tessa smiled, leaning against his solid presence. I was just thinking about that night at the train station, how differently everything might have turned out if that train hadn't broken down. Or if I hadn't decided to ride past the station on my way home, he added. You believe in fate, Matthew? He considered the question seriously. I believe that life offers us moments of choice crossroads where we can follow the expected path or venture into the unknown. The courage to choose the unknown, that's what brought you into my life. And what made you stop for a stranger at a deserted train station? His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. The best decision I ever made. As they stood together under the vast Arizona sky, Tessa felt a sense of completion she'd never known before. The journey that had begun in fear had led her to this moment of perfect certainty. She was exactly where she was meant to be. In the years that followed, the Double Y Ranch thrived under their joint stewardship. The schoolhouse expanded to accommodate more students, gaining a reputation for educational excellence that drew families from as far as 20 miles away. Tessa's innovative teaching methods became a model for other frontier schools, and she occasionally published articles in educational journals back east. Matthew's ranching operation grew steadily, incorporating progressive farming techniques that maximized the land's potential while preserving its natural beauty. Together, they created a haven of learning and growth in the midst of the wild frontier. Their wedding, held the following spring beneath the oak tree where Matthew had proposed, brought together the entire community in celebration. Tessa wore a simple gown of ivory silk, her bouquet made from wildflowers that Matthew had gathered at dawn. Their vows, written by their own hands, spoke not of ownership or obedience, but of partnership, respect, and enduring love. Mrs. Finch cried unabashedly throughout the ceremony, later declaring it the happiest day since her own wedding 40 years earlier. Jack and Tom served as groomsmen, while Tessa's cousin journeyed from St. Louis to stand as her matron of honor. Life on the frontier presented its challenges: drought seasons that threatened the crops, occasional conflicts with less scrupulous neighbors, the everyday hardships of existence far from city conveniences. But Tessa and Matthew faced each challenge as they had begun side by side, combining her practical intelligence with his steady resilience. 2 years after their wedding, their first child was born, a daughter they named Claire, in honor of the sister Matthew had lost. She inherited her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit, toddling around the ranch house on sturdy legs before her first birthday. A son followed 3 years later, Thomas, a thoughtful child who seemed to absorb knowledge like a sponge, already reading simple books by age 4. Watching Matthew teach Thomas to ride his first pony, Tessa felt a completeness that sometimes overwhelmed her with its perfection. Henry Blackstone eventually stood trial for his crimes, not only against Claire Yates and other women, but for fraud, corruption, and interference with government communications. His conviction brought a measure of justice that healed old wounds, allowing Matthew to find a peace he'd thought forever beyond reach. On the 5th anniversary of their meeting, Matthew surprised Tessa with a special gift: a small silver train engine on a delicate chain. "To remember where our story began," he explained as he fastened it around her neck. "At a train station where a beautiful, brave woman waited for a train that never came." Tessa touched the pendant, smiling at the memory that no longer carried pain. "The best delay of my life," she said, reaching up to kiss her husband as their children played nearby. That night, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson, Tessa reflected on the unexpected path her life had taken. She had come to the Arizona territory seeking merely a job, then tried to flee it in desperation. Instead, she had found a home, a family, a purpose larger than herself. "You ever wonder about the life you might have had in St. Louis?" Matthew asked, seeming to read her thoughts as he so often did. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but it's like wondering about a book I started but never finished. I know the characters, the setting, but the story feels incomplete because this," she gestured to encompass their home, their children playing in the yard, the life they'd built together. "This is the story I was meant to live." Matthew's hand found hers, fingers intertwining with the familiarity of countless such touches over the years. "When I saw you standing alone on that platform, something told me my life was about to change forever. I just never imagined how completely." "You told me I was safe where I was," Tessa remembered, leaning her head against his shoulder. "It was the first time in years I believed those words." "And now?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. She smiled, watching as Claire chased Thomas around the oak tree, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Now I understand that safety isn't just about absence of danger. It's about presence of love, of trust, of belonging." As twilight deepened into darkness and stars emerged overhead, Tessa James Yates silently thanked the broken train that had stranded her all those years ago. In seeking escape, She had found her true destination, not a place on a map, but a life rich with purpose, love, and the quiet joy of days spent building something that would outlast them both. And it had all begun with a missed train and a cowboy's simple promise: "You're safe where you are."